it certainly would have come in handy, but it was more about knowing that that other grandchild was willing to dishonor their family and steal money from their family. So that might be more valuable knowing that than actually getting the money. But in some cases, the money we're talking about is a lot. So anytime there's a death or somebody that's getting older, going into the hospital and hospice, start keeping an eye on assets. Maybe start running some asset searches. Maybe start getting some copies of bank account statements to make sure that money is not being siphoned off. Keep an eye on real estate deeds to make sure they're not being transferred to a trust. Many times, scammers will use trusts to divert assets. Start looking at loan balances. And by staying ahead of the scammer and making everybody aware you're looking at it, you can prevent it from happening. Because sometimes people do things like this because they think they're never going to get caught. They think nobody's going to be watching. If you start paying attention and actually let people know that you're watching bank accounts, you're watching assets, you're watching real estate activity, sometimes that'll keep people from taking a shot at something. It'll keep people honest if you put boundaries on your family's assets or the assets of somebody that you care about that may soon be leaving this earth. So probate fraud is a real thing. Inheritance theft is a real thing. Very, very common. It's the most common request we get as a licensed private investigative agency. So let us know if we can be of assistance. Crazy. Stocks that get purchased 20, 30 years ago, they were worth some money, and a lot of money in the bank. But estate could be bank accounts, real estate, insurance, stocks, right? Other types of assets. And when somebody is known to either be recently deceased, about to die, or even when they get older and they know that they're going to die in a few years, a lot of greedy people will start taking assets from that person and putting them in their name. It's called probate fraud. And if you are a family member of that person, or a relative, or even a close colleague or friend, you need to be on the lookout for this. It's way more common than people think. What happens is when an estate is distributed after a person dies, the executor of the estate can only distribute what they are told about for assets. Many times, insiders, it could be family members, it could be an attorney, it could be an accountant, it could be a business partner, will know that if they try to hide assets or transfer them and conceal them in advance of the person dying, they might be able to get away with stealing those assets. It's a very, very common scenario. Here's how it works. Give you an example of a conversation we had with a client within the last few weeks. This person was a member of 4 siblings. They had 2 brothers and a sister. Their mother died a year ago. Their father died 10 years ago. Imagine that. When they were growing up, their parents were reasonably comfortable. They weren't filthy rich. They had a nice house that they owned for cash, no mortgage. They had a bunch of stocks that they had purchased 20, 30 years ago that were worth some money. They had a lot of money in the bank account. And one of the siblings, one of the brothers, had died about 20 years ago. So he was dead before both parents did. One of the other siblings was reasonably wealthy themselves. The other brother, he was pretty rich. And when the parents were getting older and the father had already died and the mother was getting sick, he said, look, don't give me anything in your will. And remember that word will. We'll come back to that word will. It's very important, that particular word, how it's used. And he told them, don't leave me any money because I'm rich. I'm well off. The 2 remaining sisters, one of them was okay. She had a decent amount of money, but she wasn't rich. The other one was struggling. So eventually, the mother died. And the sister, who was our client, who wasn't really rich, wanted to buy the house from the other sister, her half, because the house was supposed to be split up between the 2 of them.
That's crazy.
And the other sister said, no, I'm not selling you the house. So she started looking at other assets, and it turns out there was no other assets. There were no bank accounts, no stocks, no vehicles. And it made no sense because the parents were both, they had worked for a municipal utility company, like a water company, electric company, and they both had very good pensions. So they had income after they died. And the father had started purchasing stocks back in the 1970s, before anybody else was buying stocks, and had accumulated a pretty good portfolio. All of a sudden, there were no stocks. So the other sister that was kind of poor was trying to hide things. No, there's no bank accounts. Oh, I don't know what happened to this life insurance. And we did an investigation, and we found that for the couple years prior to the mother dying, when she was in poor health and in and out of hospitals, she had started to sell off these stocks. She had started to take money from bank accounts. She even went to the trouble of putting a lien against the house for equity loan to get cash from the house. That's why she didn't want to sell the house to the sister, because that would be discovered. And it turns out there was about $800,000 of assets, wealth, that had been transferred to this other sister. And our client, she figured the parents had a couple $100,000 maybe in cash and plus the house. But it turns out there was $800,000 in bank accounts and stocks that had been what's called a fraudulent conveyance, improper transfer to the other sister and maybe other people. So what do you do about it? Well, one of the things that comes up when we have these conversations with clients is sometimes the client says, well, I don't want to get involved because, I don't want to create problems. Well, a couple things to keep in mind. First of all, you want to know whether or not a relative stole money from you. Even if you don't want to get the money back, you want to know. And here's the reason why. It's not like a stranger that you're never going to have interaction with again. You're going to have to make decisions on both being involved with that person emotionally and financially in your family. Family reunions. Maybe they babysit your kids. Maybe you're going to do something with the family events, right? Holidays. If you don't know whether or not that person has stolen money from you, it's not going to be for good decision making. The second thing is, remember that word will we talked about? Will is not just the name of a legal document. Will describes what goes into that document. It is the last will of that deceased person. It is their wishes. It is what they want to happen. That's what will is. It is, I will this to happen. So if in their will they say, I want to give this money to this person and this money to that person, if you let somebody do something different than that will, you're actually dishonoring the wishes of your relative or that deceased person, right? You're insulting what they wanted to have happen. So if you decide you want to give that money to the other person, that's fine. Let the will distribute the money how it's supposed to be, and then give that as a gift to the other person, the sibling, the sister, whoever, right? You don't want to dishonor the will, and you don't want to be in the dark about somebody in your family being a thief either. I know it's hard to face, and it may be a difficult reality to kind of swallow, but at some point you're going to realize this and see other things happening. So how was this discovered? Well, you want to start with an asset search to find out what is the snapshot of the assets for both the deceased person and this other.
They're never going to know.
Relative or person that's trying to steal the money.
So y'all think
turns out
y'all
the
believe
person that stole the money
how they going to know?
had paid off the mortgage. They had bought a lot of expensive assets, let's say. Won't get into the details. Now, right around the time that about 2 years before the mother had died, paid off their mortgage on their house, bought a lot of expensive toys and goodies. So where'd that come from? And they didn't make a whole lot of money either. So it was suspicious. Well, and then we did the second part, which is asset tracing. Asset tracing is looking at the flow of funds, not the snapshot of what the assets are right now, but asset tracing gets into where did the money come from? The money that came into the account, was it a wire transfer, a check, an insurance policy? Was it a real estate settlement that was sold, right? Was it that home equity loan that was transferred into their account? how did all this play out? And by doing asset tracing, you can see not only what the assets are, but what form they're in. Are they cash, real estate, tax returns? Are they securities? By knowing what the assets are, now you can determine where they came from and who rightfully they belong to. So if you have a person that's in your life as a relative, maybe even somebody close to you that you feel might have left you something in a will, you don't want to let your inheritance be stolen, especially by somebody in your family, but also by maybe a third party. So getting good legal advice from a qualified attorney may be part of it. Making sure the trustee or the executor of the estate has a list of all the assets, not just what is told to them by one person. You want to have them have a full accounting of the assets. Many trustees and executors don't do an asset search. They just go by what they're told, and that could put you in a bad spot. The other example we found, there was a person who died, older person, 90-something years old, and he had left a bunch of stuff to his grandchildren. And one of the assets that was in this estate was a classic car, an old antique car. It wasn't the antique, it was from the 1960s. And when the grandfather of this person was dying, one of the grandchildren took the car from the garage by a barn where it was hidden, moved it, and was going to fix it up and keep it, but eventually sold it because they knew they couldn't drive around in the car because people would know them and know where it came from. So they sold it on eBay, sold it for $38,000. Now, they would have gotten 1/3 because there was 3 grandchildren of the estate. So if the car was worth $35,000 or whatever, they would have got 12 grand anyways. But they were so greedy, they wanted to have the whole car, not just 1/3 of it. But they couldn't drive around in the car because people would know them and know where it was dying. One of the grandchildren took the car from the garage by a barn where it was hidden, moved it, and was going to fix it up and keep it, but eventually sold it because they knew they couldn't drive around in the car because people would know them and know where it came from, 1960s. And when the grandfather, the grandchildren took the car from the garage by a barn where it was hidden, moved it, and was going to fix it up and keep it, but eventually sold it because they knew they couldn't drive around in the car because people would know them and know where it came from. So they sold it on eBay, sold it for $38,000. Now, they would have gotten 1/3 because there was 3 grandchildren of the estate. So if the car was worth $35,000 or whatever, they would have got 12 grand anyways. But they were so greedy, they wanted to have the whole car, not just 1/3 of it. And because that car had been sitting there for more than 10 years, it didn't show up on like their insurance for car insurance. It didn't show up on current registrations. So you had to do a little more deeper digging to find out that this car was part of the estate. And more than the money, because it was only about $12,000 per person. The other 2 grandchildren were basically scammed out of $12,000 apiece. $12,000 didn't make a huge difference in their life. It would have been nice. Maybe they could pay off some bills. Maybe they could go on vacation, kids' college fund, whatever. That $12,000 certainly would have come in handy. But it was more about knowing that other grandchild was willing to dishonor their family and steal money from their family. So that might be more valuable knowing that than actually getting the money. But in some cases, the money we're talking about is a lot. So anytime there's a death or somebody that's getting older, going into the hospital and hospice, start keeping an eye on assets. Maybe start running some asset searches. Maybe start getting some copies of bank account statements to make sure.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's our hometown, right? It's called La Hacienda. It translates to the estate. Something.
Sure that money is not being siphoned off. Keep an eye on real estate deeds to make sure they're not being transferred to a trust. Many times, scammers will use trusts to divert assets. Start looking at loan balances. And by staying ahead of the scammer and making everybody aware you're looking at it, you can prevent it from happening. Because sometimes people do things like this because they think they're never going to get caught. They think nobody's going to be watching. If you start paying attention and actually let people know
they're
that
never
you're
going to
watching
know.
bank accounts, you're watching assets, you're watching real estate activity, sometimes that'll keep